In polling exclusive to Global News, Canadians say they want to see movement on affordability issues from this parliament, with 33% making that their top issue. The COVID-19 pandemic and healthcare are second and third in order of priority, with 27 and 25% respectively. Housing and the economy round out the top five. But how confident are Canadians that progress can be made? Less than half believe the government will make real progress on the cost of living, healthcare, housing, and the economy. But 61% say they have faith the government will do better with the COVID-19 pandemic.
It really is Groundhog Day. It's right back to where we were before the last election, just a couple of months ago, and the Trudeau government's approval level is almost identical to what it was, and nothing seems to have transformed. There was no honeymoon back in 2019. There's no honeymoon after this election. Well, what they're seeing is a public very concerned about what the future is going to look like. When we ask them what the issues are that are on their mind, pandemic is obviously there, but there's another set of issues are now starting to emerge that all relate to things like the economy and particularly affordability and the cost of living. And what's most disturbing in the numbers that we look at is that on things like the pandemic, the public actually thinks that Parliament can make a lot of progress, that we're headed in the right direction. But when it comes to things like affordability and the cost of living, they're not really convinced that the government can, or Parliament in general, can do anything about that right now. I think the first thing is that this is a relatively new issue. So, cost of living and affordability has really cropped up over the space of the last 2 or 3 months through the course of the election, but certainly after the election. So to the degree that the government has a plan, the public probably hasn't heard it and isn't aware of what it is. They can feel the concern in their lives, they can feel the pressure in their lives, but whatever the relief is that the government's going to be offering, they're not certain about. Whereas with the pandemic, they know it's vaccines, they know that, how to track progress, they know that things are getting better. But when it comes to the cost of living and the state of the economy, they don't feel the same degree of, I would say, certainty about the government being able to make progress. He's in a really difficult situation because it appears that Canadians want to pivot away from the pandemic and to focus more on cost of living and affordability issues. But they still remain very concerned about the pandemic. So that's that very delicate transition point about showing enough concern about staying on top of the pandemic, but also showing that your focus is shifting to dealing with cost of living issues. And those are the only things that Canadians really want to talk about. Even things like, for example, climate on our list down to number 6. I know it's at the top of the government's list, but for Canadians at the moment right now, and right now, they're more concerned about cost of living and affordability because it's something that they feel every time they go to the grocery store, every time they go online to buy something, every time they even fill up their car at the gas station, they're really feeling it. Whereas climate, a little further out, and people aren't really sure what Canada can do about it anyway, or what they personally can do, or what their government can do. But on the issue of affordability and cost of living, there's a need to engage on that. So the Prime Minister, if he asked me, he never does, but if he did ask me, I would say, okay, delicate pivot off of pandemic, and the same degree of certainty and clarity that you showed on that, you need to show about cost of living now. Among Canadians who actually have an opinion about Justin Trudeau's future, the plurality of them think that he should go before the next election. And that's even 12% of people who actually approve of the government's performance. So, there's a need at the moment for the Prime Minister to state with some clarity about what his future is going to be, because the questions are starting to be raised by Canadians. And if he is interested in showing that he wants to fight the next election campaign, he can start by focusing on the issue that Canadians are really concerned about most directly today, and increasingly directly today, which is the issue of cost of living. Even though we asked about the Prime Minister's future, it's not like people are running around asking that question right now. I think Canadians are pretty politicked out. Political drama is not something that's on their radar, and they're really focused on what's going on in their own homes and what's happening in their own lives, particularly relative to their own personal prosperity. But even beyond, whether or not you've got enough money in the bank, is the question of whether or not I can afford my day-to-day expenses. And there's a lot of Canadians right now, particularly younger Canadians, that are saying they're really feeling the pinch. So politics, in terms of the activity that takes place in Ottawa, not so much on the public's mind, but seeing leadership on issues in which there's an impact on their day-to-day lives, That's what they're looking for. And the Prime Minister has shown a real ability to do that through the course of the pandemic. So now we're pivoting off of the pandemic specifically and moving on to a broader range of issues. But that priority issue is increasingly the issue of inflation and cost of living.